Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Welcome to the show No Instructions. Today we have Tyler Hall with us. Thanks for coming on the show.
It's an honor, man, to be here. Last time we did this, I was over there and you were over here.
Yes, exactly. So that was like, maybe not quite a year ago, but it was like last summer, I think. It was a while ago.
Yeah, it was earlier in the Rollercoaster journey.
Yeah.
Where I was really still focusing on interviewing other software founders who had launched and exited businesses. And now, as you've seen, it's evolved a lot. Right?
For sure. I mean, you have a lot of viewership, I think, right now. Like the social media stuff's kind of taken off. So I follow it. I watch it. So
thank you.
Yeah. And you've had some like very compelling episodes.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll kind of jump back into your story. So
right now it's funny when people ask my wife what her husband does.
She can't answer.
She's like, I don't even. He has a podcast, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, she has no idea.
Yeah.
And there's actually days where I feel that way too. I feel like, how would I even answer that if somebody asked me what it is that I do? So, you know, we'll get to some of this later, but I sold a company a couple of years ago, had a life-altering event that sort of changed my outlook on company building. So I'm taking a break on company building, which is what guys like you and I do, right?
Yep.
And so what does that break look like? How does that manifest? I sit on some boards. I'm an advisor to a few companies. I'm an investor in about 11 companies. I have a podcast. I launched a men's coaching group. I have partners that are CEOs of these companies, but building, sort of co-founding 3 companies right now.
Right.
I've got a private equity fund that I'm working on. So it's like, I'm literally I've got an Airbnb real estate project I'm working on that I'm really excited about. So there's like, I don't know, 8 to 10 meaningful sized projects that I'm working on right now. And it's kind of like.
And you've been retired for how long?
I mean, I wouldn't say retire, right? It's like.
Retirable.
Yeah, it's like. It's nonstop. And one of the challenges is like when you get to a certain stage of life, the amount of like opportunities that exist in my world are sort of infinite. Like literally I see like 10 really cool opportunities every month that I could get involved in somehow. Right. So I try to block my time and segment my time in a way where I'm not sort of reshifting the brain every day on 6 different projects. It's like Mondays for this, Tuesdays for that, Wednesdays for this, and so on. So
yeah. Okay. So we're gonna come back to like how you got to this point for sure.
Yeah.
And you are doing a lot. Let me ask you one question before we go in kind of early days.
Sure.
How much time did you take off? Like really kind of take to reset after the acquisition?
I took probably, I planned on taking a lot more time. It probably ended up only being about a month, really.
That's not long at all.
Of like taking off, right? You know, I felt like, however, the difference between the next like year of my life and being the CEO of my company, even though I was like working and building and doing stuff, like it felt like I wasn't working.
Yeah.
Because I was actually working on things I was super excited about that were filling my cup. And I wasn't spending 80 hours a week doing it. I was spending like 20 to 30, right? So,
totally. It was light.
So it was a break still, but like actual off time, not doing any work or focused on that was probably about a month.
That's interesting though. I think that's interesting perspective because like it felt like you weren't because you go from like a 40 to 80 hour work week, depending on the week, to like just a few little things. And it just, to somebody else, it might still feel like work, but to you, it's like, you know.
The stress meter, like delta between those two is just astronomical, right? Like when you're in the seat as a CEO, especially when you raise a bunch of money, it's like you're the CEO, you're the center of a wheel of constituents. There's about 10 of them. Okay. This would be investors, advisors, your board of directors, the people in your company, your co-founder, the public, your customers, your partners, right? So you've got all these people, and the CEO is the one person in the whole company that takes all of the down pressure from all of those constituents. So when shit goes sideways, they're not calling your number two. They're not calling Susan, like they're calling you.
Yeah.
And so that's hard to put into words if you haven't done it. Like how much that really weighs on you.
Yeah.
And it can be crippling at times where like you're literally physically immobile. Like, dude, I can't get out of bed today because I don't want to face what I have to face.
Yeah, it's freaking awful sometimes.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Okay, where does your story start? Like, at what point in your life did you feel like maybe there might have been some entrepreneurial journey for you in the future?
I feel like you either are built like we are or you're not. Like, I actually don't think this is a learned skill. I think it's much more DNA than it is like you can learn how to be a psychopath, basically, right? Like you just, it's really is DNA. So, and this in my life manifests itself when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I just had a natural affinity towards money and towards saving money. And so I had this, I remember one Easter, I got a piggy bank, but it was shaped like a bunny. So I guess it was a bunny bank, right? And, you know, within about a year, I had done enough kind of side hustles as a 6, 7-year-old that I had made over $100.
Wow. That's a lot.
At that time for a kid, like $100 was like, that's a ton of money, right?
Yeah. And where'd you grow up to?
I grew up in Chandler, Arizona.
Okay. Perfect.
And so, you know, and that was things like literally I'd go to like Walmart, I would buy little trinkets, toys, candy, and then I would like sell them to my friends and my neighbors. Or classic lemonade stand kid. Like every weekend, instead of like playing, I wanted to like make a few bucks. So I'd set up a lemonade stand. And that was like started out as, you know, sort of Crystal Light, and then it moved up to like homemade fresh squeezed lemonade, and then it went from like my cul-de-sac to like the corner that was a little busier, right?
Then he starts hiring people to open booths.
Then I hired a friend to like help support the thing, you know, because like we got to a place where we could make about $20 every time we did it, and so
that's cool. Did you at that age? You said something about, you know, like you were conscious about saving money. What do you think? Do you think you were like wanting to hoard money, or was it about like, I want to go buy something?
No, I literally would not spend a dime of my money. Yeah, and I think probably some of that came from my father was a super frugal guy, and he actually did well financially, but like he did not spend money. Right?
What did he do for a living?
He was a corporate guy, so he worked at Wells Fargo for 30 years and became an executive at the company, and you know, so when he retired, like he was doing very well. But you would have never known how much money he had because of how just frugal he was with his finances. So I'm sure as a kid, I saw the way that he saved and his lack of spending, right?
I'm sure. And did your mom work or was she at home?
She was a stay-at-home mom. She was a really high-level photographer. Oh, so cool. Do you remember photographers back in the day that would do portrait paintings? And so they would film in black and white. They would print them black and white, but then they would hand color them.
Yep.
So my mom did that and was really pretty well known in Arizona for doing these kind of portrait paintings. Cool. So really wasn't like a job per se.
But an entrepreneurial kind of thing for sure. Yeah. Creative, definitely.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you're more like your mom or your dad? Personality wise,
I think I'm probably a healthy mix of both. But my dad's certainly a lot more risk averse.
Right.
Where my mom, I think, was more open to risk. And I think that's the biggest differentiator between, like, I got that side.
Yeah.
Like my appetite for risk, I could take all the money in my bank account right now, all the cash I have, and I could invest it in one thing.
Put it on black.
And not feel like one thing that I was confident in and not feel any sort of way. Like it wouldn't make me feel uncomfortable. It wouldn't make me feel excited. It's just like I am used to that level of risk.
Well, do you feel like, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And I think that people that are in our position, I mean, think about how crazy we are. We do it by choice, right? We sign up to get our butts kicked, you know, and insane. It's like, it's kind of insane. Yeah. And what I found after I sold my last company is like, and I wasn't building my own business. Like I found like not having risk kind of made me feel a little dead inside. Yeah. Like if I wasn't taking risks, you're not, it almost feels like you're not growing. And to that, like, it feels like you're not making any progress. And that feels really weird, you know? So what did you go to school next? Like, what did you do after high school?
Yeah, so 4-sport athlete in high school,
Okay.
most valuable athlete in a school of 4,000 people my senior year.
What'd you play?
I played football, basketball, baseball, and ran track.
All of them.
So yeah, I just was that guy, and that was kind of my whole, aside from my side hustles, like my day job, if you will, growing up was just playing sports year round.
It's awesome.
So I love doing that. Super competitive, obviously, through doing that. Had scholarship offers from several schools to play football. My last game of my senior year, I shattered my collarbone.
Oh, no.
And so that kind of hope and dream went out the window. I played free safety, and so it was like with a bad collarbone, there was nothing I was going to be able to do.
Yep.
And so I decided to focus on academics. So I ended up getting home from an LDS mission. I do a year at LDS Business College. And then
Where'd you go?
I went to San Bernardino, California.
Did you really?
The dirty Dino.
Dude,
yeah.
San Bernardino's wild. Yeah. No, I'm from LA, and it's not very far from San Bernardino. Yeah. The place is wild.
Yeah, so like to give you an idea of San Bernardino.
It is extremely ghetto.
It's in the 60s and 70s, it was actually one of the nicest places to raise a family in the country. And then they built a prison right there in San Bernardino in the late 70s, I believe. And then it just took a turn and went south. And so San Bernardino, when I was there, was the third highest homicide rate per capita in the U.S. And so when people would write me letters, they'd be like, dude, at least you didn't get called to Compton. And
I'm like, it's worse,
this is worse.
It's
like,
worse.
These gangsters here like laugh at the gangsters in Watts and Compton, right?
Totally,
so
totally.
It was rugged for sure.
Yeah, that is wild. Okay, so you come home. You go to school.
Come home from a mission. Go to LDS Business College sort of by default because for a couple of reasons. My parents lived in Salt Lake, lived in Bountiful, so kind of convenient there. Thought about going and playing basketball D2, maybe BYU, Hawaii, Southern Utah. Ended up saying, no, I'm just going to focus on academics. Get engaged 5 weeks after my mission. So I'm 21, fresh off the mission, get engaged to my high school sweetheart.
Freaking fresh. Oh, so she waited for you while you were in California.
That was part of the 2% or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The very few.
But so I ended up marrying my wife, still my wife today.
Awesome.
And that decision to marry my wife really forced me to figure out how to make money. Right?
Yeah. So like, what did it mean for you? So like, when you're that young in your early 20s, it's kind of like, what do I contribute? What am I going to do? Yeah. In this world,
Mm-hmm.
And some people kind of default to school because they don't really know what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like where was your mind at the time? If sports wasn't an option, was there some like academic path for you, or was it kind of like, we'll spend some time here?
So yeah, I thought I would do the academic thing, and then I learned. So I did a year at LDS Business College, and I'll sort of tell you how I made money during that time.
Okay.
But then I did a year at Stanford. This was right when Stanford, there was an organization called NovoEd. Stanford was one of the very first online universities that offered fully online bachelor's degrees. So got accepted into that program. And so did a year there. And
what year was this roughly?
This would have been 2011, 2012.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. So I was one of these guys that realized that like the education system was pretty like messed up, right? Yeah. Like I wasn't actually learning things that were going to be relevant to my life.
How did it feel to you though? Like when you went to school, did it feel forced or did it feel like organic, like you belong there?
No, it felt forced for sure.
Okay.
I felt a lot of pressure from my parents to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and again, quickly realized like there's not that much value that's happening here, right? I am wasting my time. Every second that I was in class, I felt like I was wasting time. And so get accepted to Stanford, that becomes like a whole deal, right? Because it's like that's life-changing if you have a bachelor's degree from Stanford. And I end up, because I get married, like I need to figure out how to make money, right? So I'm working full-time, going to school full-time, save up enough money to buy my first car. I'm working at KSL.com, which is a Utah company, for those who don't know, which is the largest media outlet here.
Yeah, it's a news station. And
the classifieds in Utah. So it's not Craigslist, it's not Facebook. KSL really dominates here. So I was working for KSL Cars Classified, selling advertising space to dealerships. So
specifically in the automotive space.
That
gets interesting later, right?
Yeah, this is how this all comes together. So I buy this car. It's a 2006 Audi A4.
Cool
The guy's
car.
moving to Japan. He wants $9,000 for it. All I have is $6,500. And I literally pull all the money out of my bank and I go there and I beg this guy, please. And he's like, dude, if I wasn't leaving to Japan tomorrow, there's no way I would do this deal, but I have to sell this car. So sure. So I buy this car. My dad gives me a loan. I get the car to the shop, realize the timing chain or belt or whatever is trashed.
Yeah, that's expensive.
My dad gives me a loan for $1,000, maybe $1,200 to buy new tires and a timing chain. So now I'm, let's call it, $7,800, $7,700 into this car. And I get to work the next day and I realize that this car is worth around $9,000. And so what do? I list it and I sell it within a few days and I make $1,200. And $1,200 at the time was like more money than I made in like a month at my job, right? So it was like, whoa, I just did that in a couple of days. Not thinking a whole lot of it, go out, buy another car. This is a Super Forester, get a great deal on it, buy it for $4,000, turn around, sell it within 2 days for $6,000. So now I made $2,000 on a transaction. So before you know it, I had bought and sold over the next 2 years, sort of school eventually dropping out. I bought and sold about 200 cars, private party. And I got so good at doing it that I actually developed software. It was basically a live Excel table that would connect to the back end of KSL. They had an open API. And I could say like,
little do they know,
when this car matches the criteria I'm looking for, text me immediately. So I would just get text messages throughout the day. I'd immediately call the person and say, hey, I can meet you in Salt Lake with cash.
This was 2011 or 12.
2011,
That's
12.
kind of sophisticated back then.
Super. Yeah, this is like right as cloud was sort of becoming popular, right?
Yeah.
So this was still thumb drive, install base.
Right.
So, by accident, I ended up licensing this software to about 20 dealerships in Utah. But again, this was dealer to dealer, plug in a drive into their computer, download the whole system onto their
Even the
desktop.
largest software companies back then were just going to the cloud.
Yeah.
Right. So having an option to spin up an AWS server really quick wasn't really a thing.
It wasn't a thing, right? So yeah, so I did that. I also built like a local KBB only for Utah. So I knew exactly what cars would, if I bought them for X, I knew I could sell them for Y and make a certain amount of profit. And I made a couple $100,000 doing that. Eventually, one of the dealers that I licensed the software to needed a line of credit. They call this floor plan in the auto space. Yeah. And he was a salvage rebuilt lot. So he bought wrecked cars and then he would fix them and sell them, and banks wouldn't lend him money. But I was sitting on like a couple $100,000 of cash at 22.
You lend him that money.
So I became a lender, a floor plan lender to that dealer. He's still like a friend of mine today, all these years later. And I took his inventory from about 20 cars to 40 cars. And then he would pay me basically interest on every transaction.
Right.
So it ended up being a great financial thing. But what happened was every time we would buy a car that we lost money on, which wasn't often, but sometimes it would happen, I'd say, hey, Caesar, what happened on this deal? And he'd be like, well, that was a white 2008 Honda Accord, and I bought it because the last white 2008 Honda Accord we had made money. And it was like, do we have any other data? What about the previous 10?
Totally.
Like, what about...
Or how many months ago was that?
What do people want? Like, when was that? Like, so there was all this data available, but dealerships weren't using them to make decisions on what cars to buy. So that was my first thesis, was like, if you could provide better data sets to dealers to make more informed decisions on what cars they buy, then they'd probably pay for that, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second one was, we try to acquire as many cars from consumers as possible because that's what I got good at doing.
Yeah.
Flipping cars from consumers. And every time we bought a car from a consumer, it was cleaner, it was cheaper, it was faster to frontline ready, it was more profitable, more unique than when you bought at the auctions. So it had all the characteristics you wanted in a car. And I thought, man, dealers today don't have the opportunity to buy from consumers. They all go to the auction and compete. Totally. They go to fleets.
Yep.
So I said, if we could solve the data problem to help dealers understand what cars to buy, where to buy them from, how much money to pay, and then also supply the inventory from people's driveways,
right,
that would be a winning formula. So this was 2012, 2013. I decided at that time, my brother is friends with the CEO of Domo, Josh James, says, hey, you should go learn how to do software at like one of these early Utah startups. And Domo was like one of the only cool ones at that time, right?
Yeah, and like they had just started a couple of years before that, right?
Yeah, so there were about 40 people when I joined. They were in this little tiny building.
Right.
We had raised like $6 million when I joined the company.
Yeah, exactly. And
crazy.
Josh James had just, I mean, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before that, sold this massive transaction in Utah with Omniture.
Yeah, the biggest transaction ever, 1.8 billion Omniture to Adobe. So Josh was kind of like he was like the guy in Utah. He was like the entrepreneur that everybody wanted to get close to. So I had that in. They hired me there. I did everything under the sun at Domo. As you know, the story goes, we grew from 40 people to almost 1,000 people. Raised $900 million of venture funding, which was the highest funded SaaS business ever at the time, valued at a couple $1 billion. And that was a wild ride. And I learned a lot doing that. And then I joined a company called HireVue that's here.
Yeah.
Backed by Sequoia. They had recently raised $60 million through Sequoia, Series B. And company was growing and had a big role there at a young age. What did you do there? I was the head of global renewals at HireVue. Okay. So this was renewals was starting to become a thing in SaaS, right? HireVue was really curious about it. It's not what I did at Domo, but I think I proved that I was smart enough to come in and build it and figure it out. So I had a team of about 11 people at HireVue by the time I left. So I was there 3 years, grew that business from 22 million in revenue to 55 million in the time I was there. And then they sold that company. So Domo IPO'd, HireVue gets acquired by the Carlyle Group, PE out of the East Coast for over 500 million.
And this is what, 2015 or 16?
This was 2000 so HireVue wasn't acquired till 2018.
Yeah,
but I left January of 2018. So before they were acquired, I left. And so I made like decent money on those two transactions, just having peanuts of equity, but they were big enough.
Essentially.
Yeah, they were big enough things that I had options that I could exercise. It was now liquid.
So let's talk about that before we get into Drivably, because that's where we're going next. Yeah. And with that situation, like, you go and you choose to like get mentored and to learn something. Like, how did that feel? Did you feel energized enough because you were building something every day, or were there times where it was kind of tough being an entrepreneur, stuck there for a minute? Like, describe that a little bit.
I was at this stage, you have to remember, you're not an entrepreneur until you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And so I was still a aspiring entrepreneur or entrepreneur, if you will. Like I thought that was my destiny. I thought I wanted to be Josh.
You know what, though? Like, to give you more credit, you generated a lot more revenue than people I make fun of and call entrepreneurs, right? So like, I mean, before you realized it, you had built like this little like MVP buying and selling products. I literally have 2 friends today that as a side hustle, they literally set notifications in Facebook on cars they know are selling well right now. Yeah. And when they come in, they just, boom, they go buy a car and then relist it and make a few grand. Yeah. Like, isn't that wild? Like, it is a real thing.
For sure.
So, I mean, definitely you were going to be an entrepreneur. So, back to that though, like how did you know maybe what you were missing out on yet, or not quite yet?
Probably not quite yet. I think I was like, I knew I wanted to build this business in the auto space. I knew I needed to go learn something. I probably, hindsight, I could have probably left Domo within 2 or 3 years and been dangerous enough at 25 to go start my business. But I'm glad I didn't. Like, I'm glad I stayed in the seat a little longer. I'm glad I did a second opportunity with HireVue, because Domo, by the way, like, not a great comp to building a startup, right? Like, most startups don't have unlimited capital.
And he knew what he was doing, right?
Josh was like, any investor at that time in the world wanted to fund him and wanted to give all their money. Like, so not a great comp. So I'm glad I went to HireVue, because HireVue is a different story, right? 15 years of Mark Newman, like, grinding this thing out. Finally catches like a break. They start to like grow a little bit, gets Sequoia on board, and then everything changes from there, right?
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So you leave HireVue. What next?
So I leave HireVue. I'm like, I'm going to start this software business. Who do I know?
Okay, hold on. Before you start the software business, like, what is... Okay, so that's a big decision, right?
Yeah.
So, like, what does your wife say? And, like, how do you arrive at, like, I'm going to go leave this super cush salary. Yeah. And, I'm being paid really well. Yeah. VC-backed companies usually pay pretty well. Yeah. Like, how does that go? And, like, again, where does your family fall into that? Is your wife risk-averse, or is she a little bit more, I don't know, is she risk-oriented?
You have to remember, at 21, 22, we were like balling, right? So like my wife had never experienced any financial stress. So at this stage in our life, she's like, whatever you think is right, just go do it. Like,
okay, this is important.
I fully trust you.
Okay,
right?
this is important. Okay,
sure.
Because super important. Because people will come to me and be like, "Oh, your wife is so supportive," and I'm like, "She is. She's awesome." And there's been times where she probably shouldn't have been supportive, and she was like, "Let's go for it."
Yeah.
And somebody said to me once that, and I hadn't thought about it this way. They're like, "She's supportive of you because you've built a lot of goodwill. You've never left her hanging."
Yeah.
So like, for entrepreneurs out there that are thinking about it or just not getting support from their spouse, like really think about whether, like, do you have a track record to really produce? That's
100%,
important.
100%.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these factors that we should touch on, right? So one of them is like, if you're married, your spouse has to be fully committed to the same thing or it's just not going to work. Either the business won't work or your marriage won't work.
Totally.
And so you've got to be really thoughtful about that as a main part of the equation. The other one is like, we had some capital. So we had like we probably had $400,000 or $500,000 in the bank that we could go take a risk. Right. Whereas, a lot of people, look, I talk to founders all the time that want to start a business and it's like, well, have you thought about these 12 real things, right? The financial situation being a big part of it. It's like, dude, you're going to eat shit for a few years and not have any money. So like,
and you have no idea how bad it's going to be.
Yeah. So can you last long enough to where you don't have to take a salary for a couple of years? Most can't, or they can't, or can you be scrappy enough? Like, are you technical where you can like write all the code and build the MVP without like any outside resources?
Or take a service and self-fund it, right? Or like just get freaking creative,
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Like there are, okay, right before we get into Drivably, let's go back to something you said early on about DNA versus pedigree, like people that have the DNA to do this. Tell us more about that.
It's hard to describe. Here's the way that I would say it, okay? So if
some might say it's pretty objective and like, oh, that's cold, right? Like, you mean I can't do this?
Yes.
And
I do mean that.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah, so here it is, right? So like if I sat down with you and you came to me and you said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a company. Here's what advice do you have for me, Tyler?" Here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, do you have a lot of friends? And you're going to be like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Are they great?" "Yeah." "Okay, cool. Are you married?" "Yes." "Got it." "Do you have money right now?" "Yes." "Cool. Do you have like free time? Like, do you have weekends and stuff?" "Yes." Like, cool. "Do you have like, how's your mental health? Like, are you in a pretty good place?" "Yes." "Physical, you get to go to the gym and stuff? Like, do you do all that?" Okay, so I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions and I'm gonna say, okay, before you start a company, you have to understand your relationships are gonna go to shit more than likely. Meaning you're not going to see your friends very often at all.
You're going to be a shitty friend to your friends.
You're going to be a shitty friend.
Totally.
You're probably not going to be a great husband, okay? Especially the first time you do this. Like, you don't know what you don't know, okay? You're not going to be available for your kids, for your wife. That's going to be hell. Your physical health, high probability it goes to shit, right? Which leads to poor mental health. You're not going to sleep a lot. You're going to have no money. Like, that's not fun. Like, you know how you go on date nights every Friday night? Well, like, scratch that off your budget because you're not going to have enough to do it. Okay. Everyone's going to hate you for the most part. You're going to have to fire people. Have you ever done that? That sucks. Like, so it's like you build the list of shit that you have to go through as a founder. And then the way that I can gauge if somebody's right for it is if there's no like emotional or physical reaction to me like scaring them. Right. If they're like, "Yeah, I get it." It's like, maybe you're one of the ones.
Maybe you're autistic or you're the person, right?
Maybe
like,
you're one
maybe
of the
you
ones.
don't care, right?
Yes. But if there's like, oh, dude, like if there's any sort of like, man,
no,
I
it's
didn't
true
realize
though.
that,
It's
right?
true. Like some people don't really know what they're signed up for.
Totally.
And for some people it changes. So like, let's say you assemble a team and everyone's all gung ho. Here's the challenge of growing a startup or business, whatever, right? Even a business that's in growth. Any business you're building to sell or to be even a platform to acquire other companies, any business that requires high growth requires a lot out of the people. And when you not even just are a leader at this company, especially a leader, but any person in the business needs to grow at least equal to the growth of the company. Mm-hmm. Think about how intense that is. Like, I can't just go somewhere and clock in and out. Like, I have to at least catch up with how fast the business is growing. I must grow that fast. Yeah. And like, that's intense, you know? So it's very likely that you have people at these early stages that are no longer able to meet the demand of the higher growth business. Mm-hmm. So that's tough for some.
Yeah. So I think the people that have the DNA to do it are the ones that those factors, the downside factors of doing a startup have no impact on them. Mm. And they're so like focused on, well, yes, understood, no problem. The good side, it's a shorter list, but it's beautiful if you can unlock it, right? The good side of a startup, the reason there's mystique about doing a startup and people think it's sexy, like, yeah, you are your own boss. Yes, you do, you manage your own schedule. You have your own time. You get to build something. Like, you're not just clocking in, working for the man. Like, you're actually deciding how you spend your time every day. Like, Absolutely. That's powerful. You get to work with people and build like a real connection and bond with your people that doesn't exist in corporate America. And you have the potential, it's very small, but the potential of one day making lots of money, right? and so that's the other equation, right? It's like,
that's the other hard question to ask.
You have to be willing to do it, knowing that there's a high probability you get nothing out of the equation financially.
Yeah, it's literally crazy.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at it objectively like that, it's stupid. Yeah. Most people should not do it.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't work.
Totally.
So, okay. So what is the problem that you were about to solve with Drivably? Your wife says, yeah, I'm down. Whatever you want to do. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Which is great. You're feeling confident. You've just learned a bunch of stuff at a couple of other SaaS companies. Yep. So like, how do you get to starting this thing?
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm going to start this software business that allows dealers to make more money by accurately pricing used cars and have the ability to acquire used cars at scale as a source of supply from consumers like you and I.
Did it kind of like piggyback off did the idea kind of transform and piggyback off of this idea you had like 5 years before?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So what did I do? There's a methodology that was created by Eric Ries called the Lean Startup Methodology.
Yep.
The idea of this methodology is, before you go build any product, go talk to a bunch of potential customers and show them in different forms what you're going to do and see if they're willing to pay. That's the basic idea of the Lean Startup Method. Like, don't go spend a bunch of money building shit unless you know there's something there, right? So I took that to the next level, which was, instead of going and pitching dealers on this, I launched a dealership. I built a car dealership from the ground up, and it was an expensive R&D project. We sunk a lot of our savings into that. Yeah. I had another friend that's a high net worth guy that came in with some capital too. So we built this car dealership, used car dealer, and
was it in Arizona or here?
In Arizona. Okay. Yep. Still there today. It's called Auto Hall.
Awesome.
It's like, we sold it years ago. I'll sort of get to that, but we built this dealership, and then I had a couple of developers in the dealership that were working on these, like, sort of incubating these projects inside of Auto Hall. But it operated and ran like a dealership. We acquired inventory, we had banking relationships, we brought in cars, we merchandised them, we sold them retail, talked to customers. And I could attribute the majority of the success I ended up having was because I became my own customer first, right? And I think a lot of companies succeed because the founder had a real problem and was the customer before they ever founded the company.
That's distro today. Distro. It's solving a problem that I had intensely at my last startup.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So that gave me a competitive advantage. So I did the dealership for a year. That was the hardest year of my life, hands down, because it's, like, people.
But
that
you
work
were just
in
so successful before that.
Then you got your ass kicked. Year I made $420,000 as a 27-year-old. Okay, so think about that. So I go from these golden handcuffs that, like, they call it, just getting tighter and tighter. And I'm like, dude, if I don't rip these off now, I'm just going to keep climbing in this corporate thing, and I'm never going to get to experience that. So I build a dealership. We incubate several products there. A year in, we have conviction on, like, we're going to launch this data product, go out to raise venture capital. This is now January of 2019. Fortunate enough to raise about $3 million really early on, really like pre-product, definitely pre-revenue, at a healthy valuation.
The capital markets were pretty good still at that time.
They were flowing in 2019, flowing. And so to go raise 3, I mean, I did 55 pitches before I got my first yes. So it was still hard. Raising capital is never easy.
Yeah, you still had to earn it.
But like once I got the first term sheet, the rest of the capital was $750,000. The rest came on pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And, so go raise that money. Go start hiring out a team, way over hire, start way overspending like most first-time founders do. So
sure.
Dumb.
For sure.
Like spending $120K a month like instantly on just bullshit. And,
when previously like you had operated on this super stringent budget, but somehow somebody gave me advice like before we had closed our Series A at Jump, and he's like, watch your burn.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, we won't burn over X amount, right? Of course we did.
Yeah.
Right? Like, anyway.
Burn all this money. 10 months in, I have nothing to show for it. I don't have a good product. I don't my team's all pissed. Like,
yeah.
I go back and I'm out of money. I go back to our investors and I'm like, hey, so we haven't really made any progress, but I've learned a lot. And the next time is going to be different. And like, they doubled down. So like we had investors like, you know what, we believe in you. Like, and again, the capital markets were so good. It was kind of like, yeah, we reserve follow-on capital anyway. So here it is, keep going. Right? So raised another couple $1 million, fired our entire dev team, including the CTO, brought on an outsourced team. Within 3 months, we had an MVP to market, started generating revenue. Now fast forward to COVID. Okay, so this is 4 or 5 months later. COVID happens, March, April of 2020. And the whole world shut down, as you guys know. Dealerships were not considered essential businesses. And we'd gotten to about $40K a month in MRR. Went from that.
On the software product.
On this new software product.
Yeah.
Yep. $40K a month MRR, relatively lean burn, but had about 12 people in the company at the time. COVID happens. All of our customers cancel within a week.
Oh my gosh.
0 revenue. So I go fire everybody except 3 people. It's myself, my co-founder, and we kept like 1 contractor on and 1 other person, right? Brutal, painful, right? Like, hey guys, sorry, the world's ending, and by the way, you don't have a job.
Remember those hard questions that you ask aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yeah, this is one of them. This is one of them. Sure. Like, hey, have you ever wanted to fire your whole company in one day? So go through that. Next thing you know, within weeks, we actually go make a strategic acquisition about a month later. Porsche came in and invested, which we're the first company in North America to be backed by Porsche.
Freaking love Porsche.
So they come in. It's Porsche. Don't get it wrong. They'll castrate
I'm sure they will.
I said it several times. They're like, that's enough. Like Porsche. Okay. So they come in as an investor. We use some of those funds to go acquire this business for pennies on the dollar that also thought they were going to die, right? So we kind of merged them together, pivoted to this private vehicle acquisition model, and then next thing you know, all-time high demand for vehicles from consumers and an all-time low supply of cars.
Yep,
so used car values just went through the roof.
Yep.
There was no inventory available except for the platform that we had built to acquire from consumers.
Because for a year, everyone slowed down all production, right? And so this lagging indicator, like you can't get new cars like you used to, so we're going to buy used ones.
Yeah, so we made this bet to acquire this company. We integrated fast, and then we were off to the races, had this vertical growth for a year. And this takes us to 2021, Q1 of 21.
Did you still have a co-founder at this point?
Uh-huh, yeah.
You did?
We were in it the whole time.
Oh, yeah, Tim, right?
Andrew. Tim Reiser,
Tim was there for a while, right?
Tim was the other one that was...
was he the original?
Tim came in 2021.
That's right.
Later.
Yeah.
As like our CTO, head of product. Yeah. And brilliant.
I met him recently, and I forgot he worked with you.
Yeah, amazing. So fast forward to Q1 of 21, go out to raise a equity round, Series A. In 1 week, soft circle $20 million.
Stop it.
Like our business was at this pace that we had Bessemer and we had everybody just like all over us, right? Yeah. But at the same time, I looked at what was it going to take for us to actually go solve this market, dealers acquiring vehicles from consumers. And I looked at all the juggernauts, these giant companies coming into our space, just going, dude, we're going to have to raise like hundreds of millions. Like 20 million is not going to get us anywhere. And this window, this COVID window is going to close. Like this is not going to be sustainable. It's impossible. I knew it was going to close, and I felt strongly it was going to close that year in 2021. So at the same time, I had a couple of public companies reach out to acquire the business. I was friends with the CEOs. These were automotive businesses. And so we ran a process. Within 3 months, we had 5 term sheets. 2 of them were BS. 3 were kind of in a bake-off. Next thing you know, bake-off happens. We sign an LOI. And in October of 2021, we sold the business to ACV Auctions, which is a $4 billion public company in New York.
So what auction brands do they own? Do they own like the collision type auctions, or are they the dealer auctions?
ACV is a dealer to dealer auction,
the wholesale
all
ones.
Online. So they're the first ever online dealer to dealer auction.
Yeah, that's right. That's wild. So you just combed through like a lot of sleepless nights.
Oh, dude,
a lot of crazy.
We don't have
stuff.
enough time to talk about all the stuff, but
we don't.
Brutal.
So, did you have any hesitancy in signing the LOI? Like, all right, we're going to do this. Like, were you excited or a little nervous?
I was excited. I was, a lot of people are like, dude, that was fast, 3 years. It's like, you don't know what 3 years in that life is like.
Yeah, Jump was 3 yeyears.
It's like 10 years in a normal environment.
Yeah, you look like you're like 60 now.
Yeah, for kidding. Sure. I feel
I'm
that way.
I'm just kidding.
Like,
it weathers you
it
so
takes
bad.
years off your life for
It
sure.
Totally does.
And I'm like, it was like, okay, do we go raise a shitload of money and try to compete with these giants that are coming into our space? Or do I just sell to one of these giants and join forces and then be like financially free? And
totally.
So it was a no-brainer. And valuations were insane. And I knew this window was going to close. And so I couldn't sign that fast enough. I did it over Zoom with my co-founder. We jumped on there. I shared my screen.
Really?
I signed it with him. It was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Like, I remember after selling my business, somebody called me. You actually might know him, but he calls me and he goes, I heard. And he's like, you don't have to say anything, but I heard. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I just want to tell you, I don't care how much it was for or what the terms are, but congrats. Yeah. And he's like, somebody wants what you have. And I was like, that's a cool feeling.
It's a cool feeling when, by the way, the deal almost fell apart. So the due diligence part, at some point, the buyer came back to us, the head of corporate development, and he said, hey, the deal's off. Oh, and so I went from, and by the way, we were like out of money at this point.
Yeah.
We weren't in a fundraising process. And so I went back to my wife after that call, and I remember like we were planning what house were we going to buy and vacation rent and all the shit.
Yep.
Cars, everything. Went from poor, having nothing, thinking we're going to be millionaires, right? The deal falls apart. I go back to my wife and I'm just tears in my eyes. I just say, hey, it's not going to happen. I just got a call from Craig and dude, she stone cold looked me in the face and was like, so what? And I was like, did you hear what I said? You remember all the houses, like all the plans? Like, it's not happening.
Yeah.
She's like, so what? She literally goes,
it's an awesome woman.
She goes, the kids don't care about that. They don't care about the new house or the new anything. I don't care about that. Like, we have each other. So what? And that was that was an amazing moment because it took a lot of the pressure off of me, which I think allowed me to navigate the process, get it back on the rails.
Totally.
Where I think otherwise, if I would have felt stressed about it, I probably would have done some irrational things and called competitors and tried to.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, it's really funny you say that. Like that is when you need like a partner who really has got your back, like who really can help you think through stuff. Like I had an experience like that just like a month ago. I was stressing about kind of no reason. And, my wife helped me kind of navigate through, like, it's not a big deal, like we're good, like it's all good. Yeah. But like if your head is not straight, just like you said, you're not going to be able to solve the problem like you need to solve it. Yeah. Like the business needs you to be clear.
For sure.
Okay, so you save the deal. Wires come in. How do you feel?
Yeah, wires come in. Unreal kind of feeling. It happened when we were in New York with the parent company as well. Cool. So we're all there together.
So you closed in person.
Yeah, we closed in person. We're getting ready to basically talk to, all of our team and the key people at ACV to tell them that this transaction's happened. an amazing moment. And so here I am. I find myself at the summit of the mountain, right? 30 years old, successful exit, rich, 3 kids, healthy,
still
amazing
young,
wife, still young.
totally.
Like I had it all. And I'm starting to get integrated. I'm an executive running a big business. They forecast it would be a $2 billion business at some point, just the unit that I was running.
So did you, as part of the deal, you went with the transaction?
Went with the
to stay on?
transaction.
Okay.
Was excited to be there too. Like was ready to stop being the founder and just be part of a bigger team, right? And so 4 months later, this is now February of 22. I'm in Dallas, Texas on business. I met a Marriott, walk into my hotel. I jump on this elevator. As the elevator doors are closing, a man sticks his arm in the door to get on the elevator. And he jumps on the elevator, and I just look at the guy and I say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Just normal small talk. And I'm expecting the same answer, good, you, good, cool, have a nice day. But it was different this time. He looked at me and he said, "I'm not doing well. I had to bury my 26-year-old son today."
Oh my gosh.
And he said he was a good kid. He didn't have a drug problem. It was a fluke accident. And this has been one of the hardest days of my life. And I'm like speechless. You just don't expect to hear that. And so his door's open. We're on the 10th floor. Door's open. I open up my arms to embrace this guy. I hug him. And he just says, "Hey, man, I don't know who you are, if you have a family, but if you do, like, keep them really close because you never know when it's going to be their last day." Walks away, doors close. I get super emotional because, the last several years, I wasn't really there for my wife and my kids. Like I was building stuff.
And you still kind of weren't.
Still wasn't.
Like you went
I was
into
on
the business. Yeah.
I was traveling at this very moment, right? So I call my wife. I FaceTime her. Go, "Hey, I just had this profound moment with this man on the elevator, and I'm so sorry I haven't been there for you more. And the kids," and she gave me a ton of grace and documented the whole thing. And I didn't know why. Exactly 1 month later, February 28th, March 1st, it's a Tuesday, 2022. I'm in New York City getting ready to present with the CEO of the parent company on NASDAQ, Wall Street, CNBC Live, the whole deal. This is like every entrepreneur's dream. And I wake up that morning, I'm getting ready, kind of adjusting my tie in the mirror, if you will. And I see a phone call come through from my mother-in-law. And it's 5 a.m. Arizona time when she calls. And
that's not good.
Immediately I knew something was wrong. So instead of answering the phone and saying hello, I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Brooklyn's going to the hospital in an ambulance, and we're not sure what's going on." That's my wife, her daughter. "And you should probably get home," right? So I text my assistant. Uber shows up. I jump in the car. I'm getting text message updates from my father-in-law. And they read like this. And I've read these 1,000 times. "Hey, just got to the hospital. Hey, they just checked her in for triage. They did an ultrasound and found 2 liters of blood in her abdomen. She's bleeding out." The next text message, at this point, I'm at the airport. I'm waiting to board the plane. It's a picture of the whiteboard in the doctor's office, and it says ruptured ectopic pregnancy. So I go to Google, I look this up, and I realize that in more than 50% of cases, when this happens in the home, which it did, it's lethal. They die, the mother and the baby, obviously. And, so I go from having quite a bit of hope to, like, my wife's going to die. I struggle to get on the plane. I'm sort of in a state of shock. So people are like kind of helping me get on the plane, navigate that. I get on the plane. I'm sort of hysterical. I'm kind of flipping through these stages of grief already because I'm thinking my wife is going to die. It's the longest flight ever. It's New York City to Phoenix. It's like as far as you can travel.
Over 4 hours, man.
It's like 5 hours that way. It was just, the longest flight ever. And the next updates are they just rushed her into the front of the line for an emergency surgery. And then 1 hour later, still in surgery. 1 hour later, still in surgery. 1 hour later, still in surgery.
Jeez.
And at this point, the plane is now descending. So fast forward literally 4.5 hours later. And I get a text from my father-in-law. I hadn't heard from him for like 2 hours. And I get a text that says something like, brace yourself. It doesn't look like she's going to make it. And my father-in-law is a pretty hardcore dude, Phoenix PD homicide detective, and I was sure, like I had an impression that I was sure she was dead, but he was waiting to tell me until I got to the hospital.
Like he was playing it cool or something.
Yeah, just, hey, it's not productive to tell you now. Just get to the hospital, and I'm expecting, so I run through the airport, get in my Uber, get to the hospital, run past the emergency room reception desk to the elevator up one floor. I get to her room, and I open the door, and audibly the first thing I notice is that the heart rate monitor is still going. So there's my wife in kind of a state of comatosis, but her heart is beating, and her dad, her father, sitting right next to her, which is what he had to endure that day. I don't wish that on any father.
Yeah.
So I sit at her bedside, and I just say, hey, how's she doing? And not even the moment that those words came out of my mouth, right as I basically enter the room, she has this seizure, this really bad seizure. And doctors and nurses have to come in and get it under control, and it seemed like it lasted forever. They get her under control, heart's still going. That night, I don't think I even blinked. Definitely didn't sleep. Don't even think I blinked because I was fixated on this monitor, just ready for it to flatline. And I actually remember a couple of times, like, I started to doze off, and it would flatline, and then I'd like wake up, and it was still going, and I was like, oh my gosh, like she's still here.
Geez.
So this happens for like 3 nights in a row, and finally on the 4th day, she starts to do better. The double blood transfusion that they've been injecting her with is starting to hold. She starts coming to, like showing signs of life, communicating, and I remember at some point I said, hey, what happened when you had that seizure? Do you remember that at all? And she said, when I heard your voice, it gave me life. And it was one of those experiences where, we had operated so independently for so long.
Right.
I didn't realize how connected really we were, that it was so connected that like just the whisper of my voice gave her enough strength to like fight, get through it. So the silver lining of that story is that she ends up fighting. She ends up making it through. We lose a child in the process, but almost didn't grieve that for a long time because we were so concerned about my wife.
Totally.
And starts becoming healthy. But people are like, what did you learn through that? It's like everything. Like my life now is like 2 parts. Part 1 was 0 to 31. And then part 2 is 31 to the time I die. Yeah. And that's the way that my life is going to be because of how much things changed through that experience. Do you know how many times I thought about my work and my career and money in the hospital?
That was going to be my next question.
0.
Yeah.
Not even one time. Do you know, and by the way, do you know how many times people from work texted me that they needed something? 0. Like you quickly realize like, oh, it's not important for them or for me or for anybody, right?
Yeah.
The way that changed the way that I prioritize my time, right? Like
this wasn't that long ago.
This was 2 years ago. 2 years ago in March.
So when I first met you, last year, it was
only
literally
about
like a year before.
Yeah.
So it's still really fresh.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry you guys went through that, but the perspective you gain from something like that, it's just powerful.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely incredible. I was actually listening to a podcast episode of yours. I'll never forget it, hearing one of your guests, you have to remind me his name, maybe you remember off the top of your head, but who lost his wife at night.
Kelly Bills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A powerful story. It was my mom died when I was a baby, and my siblings experienced, her death, like in that. So I was listening to that. It was like very visceral for my family's experience. It's pretty wild. But what an incredible perspective. People are going to want to hear more for sure. Where can people get in touch with you if you have other questions or want to ask you something? Where can they reach you?
Instagram's the best. Yeah. Tyler Hall on Instagram.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then also the name of your show.
It's called the Rollercoaster podcast.
Awesome. It's a great podcast. Thanks. I was on it.
Yes.
And
it is great. It's actually, just to plug it real quick, I mean, we went from zero, first episode 1 year ago, just over a year ago, to in the first year we did 80 million views on the show.
No, you did not.
Yeah, across social media platforms. And it'll be, we think it'll be by the end of this year, maybe more than the population of the United States if we keep on this trajectory. So, yeah, so the show's really picked up a lot of steam, and it's the reason why is because we have really deep and vulnerable discussions with people, and we've realized that, dude, people out there are struggling. Like, most people are going through something hard right now, and when you can listen to somebody say, my wife died and I watched her die in our sleep, and I hit the lowest of low points, and here's how I've come out of it.
Right.
That gives you hope no matter what you're going through.
Totally.
Like, if Kelly Bills can come back, you can come back too, right? So it's a meaningful podcast, and I love it, and I love our guests, and I think people would love to listen to it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks, brother.
Cool. Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.